Imtiaz, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Rich, how are you?
Yeah, very good. Thanks for your time today. As you're aware, I think this conversation fundamentally is about exploring, your career and how you've kind of become the practitioner you are today. So I guess the way I wanted to start this was really just listening to you talk about, yourself and your journey to the current day, really, in sports medicine, in sports performance. So on that note, Imtiaz, if you could, just give us an overview of your career to date, that would be fantastic for us all to hear.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that. So essentially, I trained in the UK, became a GP first, and then did a master's in sports medicine. That was the only way to become a sports medic back in the day. We're talking 17 or 18 years ago. So after you then have a master's, you then start working for teams and developing your interest, working at clinics as well. So I started initially working for the FA on the England women's side, built up some experience there, and then started working in the academy at Millwall, and then quite quickly became the first team doctor at Millwall Football Club, which was a good and a really steep and useful learning curve. At the same time as I was doing that, I started working as the academy and development team doctor at Tottenham Hotspurs, and I combined both roles for between 6 to 8 years. I was working with Chris Ramsey and Les Ferdinand, who had left Tottenham and then came over to QPR. And by that stage, I was more at Tottenham. I'd left Millwall. I was just working in the academy at Tottenham with some really excellent people. So I had a really good, nice, settled job over there. But I did miss the first team football. And when Chris and Les came over to QPR, they asked me to join them, I think, a couple of years later. And so I joined as club doctor, then became head of medical. And then as of last year, my role expanded as I was head of medical, and then I got more involved in the performance and sports science side of things. So I've been overseeing both the medical and science for the last year. So that's kind of led to where I am today. I've also been medical advisor on various boards with a different sport. I do cricket. I mentioned that to yourself before. I've been the medical advisor for the Pakistan cricket team, and I'm co-chairman of the FA Medical Society and advisor to the FMPA, which is the Football Medicine and Performance Association. So quite a few different hats, but my main role in sport is with QPR.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for that overview, Imtiaz. And obviously, it's very apparent that your lane of expertise is sports medicine as a medical doctor, but as a sort of head of performance, and that includes medicine, sports science, S&C, and lots of other professional disciplines. Do you find that being a medical doctor, or perhaps it's more than that, arms you with the sort of right skill set, I suppose, to fulfill that kind of broad role?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, for me, after COVID was a really big challenge because your traditional club doctor role expanded massively. It covered all aspects of the club, and that's medical, non-medical, performance-related, just everything. And so I think it put myself in, certainly within the club, in a good position to kind of take on a more expanded role. For me, I'm not a sports scientist. You know that I'm very much a medic, but I've got a good understanding of the sports science side of things, having worked with some excellent people. So I see it more as a kind of being able to manage the department, make sure it runs smoothly, make sure that my team get what they need and they get the support they need as well, so that they can kind of achieve their potential, and of course, ultimately the players' potential. So I think the fact that I had been established as within the team as a manager across kind of different situations then helped me make that transition. But I'm always, I suppose, I do know I'm a medic first. That's my training. That's my specialty. With kind of a strong interest in the performance side of things.
Yeah, fantastic, and makes perfect sense. We none of us are experts at everything, that's for sure. I suppose in parallel with hearing about your journey from, doing the sports medicine qualification and starting in the sports context with Millwall and your clinical work in the healthcare setting, over the course of your career, how have you seen certainly the sporting side of sports medicine, sports performance change? Is there any trends that you've witnessed that really stick out? Really curious to sort of get your take on this.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of changes. Okay, the obvious big ones are personnel. So the amount of people and the amount of staff. So when I first started out, the teams were quite small, and now they become a lot bigger. So therefore, when you had one or maybe two physios, you'd now have got 3 or 4, and same with sports therapists. Similar with sports science, we did have someone initially, but very kind of basic use of GPS, and then that's kind of expanded where it's essential to have someone just on that area, someone just in the gym, someone just for the pitch, someone overseeing things. So the team has become a lot bigger. When you then add on kind of additional staff as well, like nutritionists and psychologists, we have a sleep specialist who comes in at QPR as well. So you get various different people who come in to add some of their expertise. So that's probably the first big thing. We should take that as a good thing, and the majority of it has been good. There is something to say about a tight, neat group that has all the ownership and all the responsibility, because it kind of the buck stops with you when it's a smaller group. As you get bigger, a lot of it is about communication, correct management, making sure that you're kind of all on the same page and same path, while you're still welcoming other ideas to kind of come in to enrich what you're already doing. So you want new ideas coming in, but you want to make sure that also that everyone's kind of pointing and pushing in the same direction. That is harder with bigger teams. So that's one obvious thing. Coming along with that, and probably part of the reason why you've got so many staff, is the amount of things that we test and the data. So the amount of things that are tested from pre-season all the way right through to kind of routine or regular testing during the season. And these are things that we as a club have thought through quite carefully, we feel, and that we're only kind of choosing things that we feel we are acting on or have to use. But there's a vast amount of data, and that's probably links in quite nicely to kind of my journey towards using AI to kind of help with those areas. So I would say they're the two things. And the other thing is that the pressure with a lot of the media coverage and now social media, there's a lot more pressure on medics than there used to be, I think. So I believe that a lot of the medics nowadays, some have to make quite big, prominent decisions, and as soon as you're there making decisions, not so much myself in my current role, but you're being scrutinized quite a lot. So probably those three things, I'd say.
Yeah, no, they all make sense. Those elements that you talk about there, and I think that I'll probably try and tackle them one by one, if that's all right. I'll definitely come back to workflow challenges and incorporating data sets for sure. But I'll start with actually, the fact that you mentioned that the teams have expanded in terms of volume of personnel, and I suppose that brings itself a degree of kind of people management challenges. But alongside that, is there sort of organizational challenges that you face?
Yes. So when you've got an expanded team, of course, the ultimate goal is performances on the pitch, and you want everyone to perform well in terms of the football team. But you also want your staff to develop. You don't want people just kind of staying and you're not kind of getting better. So I see some of our senior management roles, like what I'm currently in, as not only developing players, but developing staff. And remember, those same staff that we've talked about have got massive interaction with the players. So I've got one slide on the presentation I use where I say staff development is player development. And I think a lot more focus could be done on that, especially as the team is expanded. Once teams are expanded, there are challenges arranging meetings. There are a lot of meetings in football and in sport and any kind of high performing environments, but they are really important. It's important to kind of make them short, sharp, make them productive, and not just for the sake of it. But being organized comes with a kind of making sure you've got that culture within your team as well, because the last thing you want to be doing is always chasing up people to turn up to meetings or be on time or those kind of things. So those sort of ground rules or respect the factors that we discuss. We discuss those quite early on within a season, and also towards the end of the season, just to make sure that everyone's still doing the right things, just to make sure that you're not wasting time or energy chasing up organizational aspects. They should really flow more naturally.
Yeah, sure. I think, excuse me, you mentioned about the pressure that you're under, and I think certainly the elite sporting environment can be very emotive. So having those clear kind of task focused culture conversations early on, seems like a very sensible thing. In parallel to the sort of efficiencies that you talk around there, how do you I guess deal with kind of like those workflow challenges, if you like, in that you've got multiple sort of practitioners. You're talking about having meetings that are very succinct and to the point, but integrating each sort of professional discipline's workflow into something that's kind of whole and meaningful.
Yeah, that is a real challenge. So I suppose it's important to know the direction that you're trying to go in with the team, and what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to do. And when the games come so thick and fast, it's very hard to kind of veer away from the next game. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges about trying to kind of achieve something together as a team. You'll hear many cliches in football, and everyone will talk about the next game being the most important, and of course it is at that moment, and that's what many managers will talk about. But if you've got 3 games in 7 days, then they actually all become quite important. And we have to be that voice sometimes, just to kind of talk about risks and talk about how to manage risk within the context of a few games. So what we try and do is look at chunks. So we'll kind of look at like I mentioned, 3 games in 7 days, or 7 in 28 days, and try to kind of manage that whole chunk. We'll kind of do summaries at the end of those, just to see how we've achieved, or whether we've achieved what we set out to, and also what we can learn from those periods, because sure enough, those periods will come again later on in the season, or further seasons. So if, for example, those 7 matches in 28 days didn't work out well, what was the reason? Did we kind of take too much risk on certain players? Did we not emphasize recovery on other players that probably needed extra recovery? And how we can then communicate that with our manager, with the director of football moving forwards. So I would say moving away from just thinking just about the next game, and thinking about the bigger picture, I think is important, but not to get obsessed by it, because if you get obsessed by it, then people will then always just throw back to you, but the next 3 points that are the most important. So getting that balance, I think, is important.
Yeah, no, I hear loud and clear that sort of short-term perspective that is often the emotion and maybe the objective of the fans and the coaches and a lot of the other stakeholders, whilst you as the head of performance have to have a bit of a more medium long-term take on things. I suppose very much related to that medium long-term perspective. Do you find yourself in a situation where you and those that you sort of directly manage have to almost make business cases in terms of what you perhaps want to do in terms of your processes, or in terms of like the tools that you might need at your disposal for future kind of medium long-term perspectives that you have, that you almost have to separate from that immediate, hey, the next game is the most important thing that we have to deal with?
Yes, and the clear thing is, we're in the real world, and we're in the real football world, where you've got to be credible. You have to make sure that you're not like talking about games like weeks in advance, when the next game is the most important, that might save you from relegation or push you towards the top 6. So then when decisions go against you, where they're unwise decisions, I don't get upset by that, as long as people have understood what I'm trying to kind of the message that I'm trying to give. So I'll always give a message. So it's one of the things I learned when I first came into this role, that our director of football said. He always said to me, just always give your opinion. Doesn't matter how bad some people might take it, as long as you as long as you give it, people will always respect you for that. And then what I learned over time was, then you need to be able to communicate that in a good way. So you communicate your decisions in good ways. And go back to kind of a part of the original question you asked me, you're learning all the time. So you're learning through these kind of chunk of matches. And then if you then find that actually they went well, then great, you can take the good points and make sure it carries on. But if they didn't go well, then that can add towards your business case of why you need to kind of have an additional piece of kit or an additional staff member, or some other process coming in. So we kind of record and document things quite carefully. And we'll use things at the right time, and we'll always bring them up again. So if things like that happen, we'll bring them up at that time, but also make notes and kind of then put cases together if we need to kind of enhance or improve our department further.
Yeah, I got you. I think you said a couple of words there which really resonated with me, particularly kind of, I suppose, managing up to the C-suite in a sports organization around, business case, making a pitch. Is that how you go about sort of presenting cases for things to the club?
Yeah, I do. So that sounds formal, but I do that. But before that, I'll always have informal chats. So if I've got an idea, I want to see if it's worth kind of pursuing or not. So I'll have a chat or a heads up or some sort of informal sort of discussion saying, look, this is where I think I'm going. And then I'll get a sense of whether it's worth doing that kind of business case or pitching an idea further. Because last thing anyone wants is something to come out of the blue, especially if they disagree with it. Also for yourself, you don't want to spend all that effort on something that might be a non-starter. And so, and the final thing is, when you're putting a case together, you want to be successful, right? You're doing it for a reason, because you believe in it, not just because someone's asked you, or it's just kind of just off the cuff. You actually believe in it. So if you believe in something, then you should put full effort in it, and you want it you want the other person to understand why you believe so strongly in it. The majority of pitches that we've done, we've got, and that's why I don't do many, because I do it at the right time. So like most people in my position will say no to many more things than you will say yes to, because why even get to that stage where it's not going to be a reasonable thing for your club to do?
Yeah, of course. I think, you articulate beautifully exactly how you go about formally and informally sort of making things happen at Queen's Park Rangers and perhaps some of your other environments. Do you find that you and the team do sort of extensive due diligence yourself to make sure that you believe in something? And, of course, I suppose I link that directly to the engagement that you've had with Zone 7. I mean, is that a process that you find yourself doing time and time again before you make these kind of informal and formal approaches?
Yeah, 100%. You have to do it yourself. I do delegate things to members within my team because I trust them. But with the big things like this, big decisions like this, that I've got a big financial outlay and can change the direction of where your department's going, you have to do your own due diligence, because ultimately it'll be myself in a meeting like this, whether it's on Zoom or face to face, that will be there having to justify why we've chosen a certain path. So whether I've asked somebody else to look it up or kind of do some of the due diligence, I'll make sure I'm up to scratch by the time I prepare, or I'll just do it myself for something as important as this. So the clear answer is yes, because otherwise I think I've used the word already, you won't be credible, and people won't trust you. So you have to kind of do that to quite a lot of detail.
Do you have I suppose, a set process for part of your team to follow when you've delegated that diligence, or is it sort of a little bit more ad hoc, and then you formulate the kind of diligence when it comes to you? And maybe that's what you did with Zone 7. I'm not sure.
No, with Zone 7, I did it myself, along with our one of our first team physios at the time, Daryl. So who's now our acting head physio or interim head physio. So at the time he was the number 2 physio, and we decided to kind of research it ourselves first, but I took more of a lead on it. But to answer your question, I'll give you a different example. When we started using ISA kinetic Biodex machines at our place, we first of all, I wanted to find out if there was interest, develop some interest within some people within the department, got them to look at the evidence themselves first. So therefore, when you look at the evidence, then you can actually have a proper conversation about something. If you're just speaking to someone who's got all the knowledge and trying not sell you something, but who's a big fan of something, then you'll just literally follow what they say. But if you look at the evidence, you'll look at the pros and the cons generally. So I got them to do that first, then got somebody to come in from the place, from the Biodex or isokinetic company, so they can show their products. Then I got specialists in the field to kind of discuss with them. We then spoke to other clubs that used it and didn't use it. For me, it's really important to find out the attention to negative cases, attention to cases of who've gone through the same process as you and decided not to do it, because otherwise you'll just kind of just look at the positive side the whole time. So actually, it was very similar to what we do with Zone 7. So two completely different products, but we did the same process. So there is a process there. To kind of find out knowledge about something.
Yeah, interesting, and again, resonates strongly. Exploring those that are maybe thinking and going through a similar process versus those that are not, so that you kind of avoid that group think, or almost, I suppose, doing your internal validation process before you even make a business case. I like it. Just transitioning forward the conversation a little bit. I'm keen to know in the role as head of performance, or maybe as a panel member on the medical boards that you sit on. What sort of tools, what sort of environment do you see being core to a successful performance operation? And maybe that's a bit vague. Perhaps it's something like tech generation, analytics, obviously speaking from the lane that I'm sitting in at the moment, but I'm keen to sort of understand what the performance landscape looks like from a tools perspective in all your roles, really.
Yeah, so look, analytics is a big part of it. So there's a lot of data coming in. And we know that, we see it, and it's almost like as soon as the data is coming in, it's in your environment, you need to assimilate it and act on it straight away. So if you haven't got structures in place to do that, then actually there's no point taking it. So every time someone's going out on the field or training, there's more data coming in, and that data is not just isolated for that one day. You need to look at it in the context of the days leading up to it, the weeks leading up to it, and what's about to happen as well. So if you're not on top of that, then it can become a big issue. So you have to have an environment where that's looked at in a really important way. We also need to get feedback from our players. So making sure you've got kind of a way of getting their, for example, wellness done and RPEs checked, and anything that you believe as a department that is important, getting those checked in a way that actually you can act on it, rather than finding out at the end of the day that somebody's hamstring was tight, or someone's knee was hurting. If it's going to make an impact on the day, you need to know about it. And I suppose it can get overwhelming at times because there's a lot coming in. I mentioned two areas. We've not even talked about the strength measures that we take in terms of screening, the jump test that we take, if we're looking at hydration, if we're looking at sleep data. With all those coming in, I think as the landscape now and certainly going forwards will be, you've got to be really on top of those sort of markers, so at your fingertips, what they show, and they can then, most importantly, help your decision making. Because there's no point just having them and just shrugging your shoulders and just doing what you want. You're doing it for a reason. Now, even if the reason is that you end up ignoring it, I don't mind that. I really don't mind not acting on it positively. But what I do mind is not looking at it at all. That's the differentiation.
Like almost being empowered, I guess.
Yeah.
To make your decision one way or the other. And the other message I think I'm taking away from that quite strongly is that being aware of why you're doing something, and that it has to almost like sit into your workflows without being disruptive.
Yes.
Curious to know, do you see a big variation in the different environments? So obviously the football environment where you work at Queen's Park Rangers, but I'm thinking maybe the cricket environment. Is there a different workflow, for example, or do you see similarities?
I see similarities in elite ability, in work ethic of some people within those environments. In terms of the support structures, there's a lot that can be improved in the other environments that I've worked in, and that comes with time in terms of the technical abilities and looking at the data and analysing those. I think in football, we're at a place where a lot of effort's been put in over the years to get everyone to a stage where we can kind of be very comfortable looking at the data, analysing them, making decisions based on them, and being quite fluid. That takes a little bit longer. That I think is a bit behind in cricket, the other sport I've worked in. And I'm not just talking about international cricket. I'm talking about club cricket within England as well, because I've had meetings and discussions with the use of data within those environments, and it's not quite, I believe, as advanced as it is in football yet. I don't believe it will take long to get there, because when new things come in, people will then see the benefits and learn from it and start pushing. So there will be some environments where it's worked really well, but I don't think it's as across the board as it is in football, where you'll find Premiership, Championship clubs should be pretty on point with a lot of those objective markers now.
Yeah. Okay. Having successfully implemented an analytics tool like Zone 7 into Queen's Park Rangers, how would you go about sort of doing due diligence and maybe doing that implementation in a different environment? I'll use cricket again. It could hypothetically be any different environment. Would you follow the same process, or would you look at it through a slightly different lens?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'd follow the same process because I started off with it. I think you might remember, I started off myself quite skeptical about it. When I was first approached about Zone 7 and artificial intelligence, I looked at it again, like I always do, but said no twice before I decided to kind of look at it in a lot more detail. And I think it's good to be skeptical, because if things are going well in whatever environment you're in, then it's rare that you would need to make a massive big jump or a big change to what you're doing. You might have to make a small change, but to make a big change could go the other way. So I think being skeptical is the right place to start from. However, being open-minded is just as important. And that's one thing I've probably noticed where when initially, a couple of years ago, when I was initially talking about Zone 7 artificial intelligence, people thought it was like too futuristic and not really something that you can apply to day-to-day use. And actually, even at the recent conferences that I've spoken at both leaders and at Isokinetics, I can sense when I'm speaking to people afterwards, it's almost like it's a brand new idea, and it's not actually brand new anymore. It's been, I know we're still early adopters, but it's been 2-3 years, and that's quite a long time, I think, in sport or elite sport.
Sorry, I cut you off there, but I was going to say, you've made the incremental steps. I heard you say something around, if things are going well, you don't necessarily need to make sort of giant leaps and big changes, but that's not always the case about how to get better, is it? It's about making incremental steps. And it feels to me as an external looking at the way you and the guys at Queen's Park Rangers operate, that's exactly your MO, if you like. And it's not about revolutionising, it's about evolving.
Yeah, exactly that. And what we're doing now, in a few years' time, I'd hope that we're not doing the same things. So we're kind of always pushing and always trying to learn and get better. Of course, I hope I won't look back and say that was just ridiculous what you were doing. So you want to keep pushing, but not having to make kind of giant leaps. And every year I've tried to kind of add in something different, not just for the sake of it, but we do, as I mentioned, get approached quite a lot about various new things, and you kind of look at things carefully. And certainly Zone 7, when it came to me a couple of years ago, when I looked at it in a lot of detail and did that due diligence by looking at the evidence myself, away from what Zone 7 was sending me, speaking to people that Zone 7 had recommended, but also that they hadn't recommended, and speaking to people who decided not to take it. I think they were just as important, some of those conversations, before I made my own decision at QPR.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Key question from me is how do you, Imtiaz, measure the success of the decisions that you've made and the operation that you lead? Obviously, in sport, it's certainly from an external perspective sometimes hard to look past the results on the field, on the pitch, on the court, whatever the sport is. But we all know, particularly those that have worked or do work in the environment, that there's far more to the operation than perhaps the definitive result of the team or the individual. But how do you and I suppose your team go about, reflecting and measuring on your success, both in the short term and the long term?
So we look at what we're doing now, but whenever we do our end of reports and what we look at every year, we always look at the last few years as well, because like I've mentioned, in 5 years' time, we should be doing better than we are doing now. So it is a process. So I'll look to see if we've improved or as a department. And that was actually one of the key questions I asked myself about Zone 7. I took away any sort of financial thoughts and just thought, if we have a product, would we as a department get better? And or could potentially we get worse or stay the same? Now, I think there is potential to get worse with certain things, because you can do things in a right way and then blindly follow something and actually get worse outcomes. That could happen. But what we tried to think about is, okay, actually, if you're going to measure things and it's going to go through an algorithm or something external, then the data you're putting in is really, really important, the quality of data you're putting in. So even if I get something like an artificial intelligence like Zone 7, it will make me and our department think a lot more about what kind of things that we're measuring and the quality of data we're measuring. And so we started breaking it down and looking at all the areas. And I know you know this because you've told us yourself that GPS data is really important. Their past injury history is really important. No problem. That's quite straightforward. Then as a department, when we're looking at objective measures like strength measures, okay, right now I'll start thinking about measures that we're going to get in that we feel is useful, but also that can add into Zone 7's algorithm to help improve that. And you can take it as far as you want. So earlier I've mentioned taking wellness or RP. Historically or traditionally within many clubs, it's not done to a high level because of player compliance. But if you can explain to your team and also the players that actually it's not just you just looking at it, so but it's actually coming into an algorithm that can hopefully help improve their prediction, then you can see where you can kind of get more buy-in to certain things as long as you communicate it in the right way. Does that kind of make sense in terms of how we used it? We didn't just use it just for the answer that it gave, but actually we used it to see, can we make the whole department better? And for me, that's more a determinant of success if actually the whole department is improving and developing as well as the results.
Yeah, no, that's really enlightening, actually, and I think probably should be for the listener as well. It's not always quite a simplistic and binary answer. So thank you for that. I guess on that note, I don't want to go on and take too much of your time, but how do you see the next 5 years evolving, I suppose? You talk about, hopefully getting better over the next 5 years and looking back and perhaps not doing, what you've always done, if you like, and the same things that you're doing now. Where do you see the performance medicine space, evolving into?
Yeah, look, I would say, like I mentioned in my recent presentation, that the advances in all aspects of AI is rapid at the moment. And you only have to just kind of search on social media or the internet and see there's new things happening all the time. Doesn't mean all the things that are coming are going to be excellent or they're going to be the end product, but the development is rapid. So I would only see it improving and getting better. I use the analogy of the chess machines that started off initially, where Gary Kasparov would always beat the artificial intelligence machines, and then they started kind of getting closer, and then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but the machines overtook the player and got better. And then rather than getting despondent about it, which is the initial reaction, oh gosh, they're taking over, it was, well, actually, why can't we just work together? And so then now there's a proposal of looking at advanced chess where you're working with a computer against another player with a computer as well. So you use those abilities of the computer or the machine generated learning, but don't lose that kind of intuition that humans have. So I think that's probably where we're going to get better. I think linked in with that is how it's discussed and how it's communicated. That's really, really important. So, of course, I've gone on this journey and I feel I understand this area well, not amazingly, but I understand it well. But I didn't know it at all 2 years ago. And when I'm talking to some other people now who are curious about it, they have to go on that journey. And that journey involves not just them learning, but communication with other staff members within their team, some of them who'll be very, very skeptical. Then when you bring in coaches and director of football and owners, you can see where you've got to be really kind of know what you're talking about, but also know how to communicate it. I've mentioned to you that with artificial intelligence and Zone 7 predictions, I don't ever sit there at this stage and discuss them with players. Because I don't want players knowing that there's a red or an amber or a green flag lit up for them. I want our staff to know about it so we can act on it and we can do the interventions, whether it's nothing or soft tissue or gym or training based. But perhaps in the future, Rich, we might actually have that with players, and I might be sitting there with a player down and say, look, this is what Zone 7 is. You know what Zone 7 is already. This is what it's shown, and this is what we're going to do about it. Is there anything that you feel different? And they may agree or disagree, and then you can then take it to another level. I think we're far off that at the moment because of the culture within football and kind of the flag system. But I can see a place where that's going to happen in the future.
Yeah. Insightful. Harmonization of technology with the human autonomy and decision-making power retained.
That has to be retained. And at the moment, we're it's kind of a no-brainer that it's retained. In the future, it may be lessened, or you might. I'm again another phrase that you've heard me say before, where I say like the computer or artificial intelligence or Zone 7 is another member of my team, and genuinely is. It doesn't mean it's better than a human at this stage. It doesn't mean its opinion is better. It's a different opinion. It's external opinion that comes into us, and it makes us think. It makes us talk. It makes us debate things. But in the future, it might be the decision, and it might be actually, well, that is an important member of staff who's saying, watch out, this player's at risk. I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're on our way there, and I don't see why that wouldn't happen going on in the future. But that mixed in with our subjective human intuition, I think we should be able to get the best outcomes.
Yeah, fantastic. Imtiaz, I know it's not that long since the season finished, and it's probably not that long since the season is about to start. So I don't want to take up any more of your time. I really appreciate you having the chat with me today, and enjoy the rest of the summer break, whatever remains of it, and look forward to collaborating with you in the new season. Take care.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, mate.
If you want to hear more from Zone 7 and our Performance Hub, you can follow us at the website zone7.ai, or follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. There'll be an episode every month, and you can find out more information by following our Twitter account and also on LinkedIn. Thanks.